The sun had barely risen over the village square when they dragged him out. A baker, accused of selling bread mixed with sawdust. His hands were bound behind his back. His feet scraped against the cobblestones as two guards hauled him toward the wooden platform at the center of town. The crowd had already gathered. Mothers held their children close, not to shield them, to make sure they watched. This was medieval justice. It was never about fairness, never about truth. It was about one thing only: fear. And fear worked. The medieval world operated on a brutal logic. Lords ruled over peasants, the church ruled over souls, and violence ruled over everything. In a time before police forces, before prisons as we know them, before any notion of rehabilitation, punishment had one purpose: to terrify the population into obedience. And it did. The baker stood on the platform now. A magistrate read his crimes aloud. The penalty was clear: that he would be placed in the pillory for 3 days. His ears would be nailed to the wooden frame. If he wanted freedom, he would have to tear himself loose. The crowd did not gasp. They had seen worse. They had seen men boiled alive in public squares. They had seen tongues cut from mouths. They had seen bodies broken on wheels, left to rot for weeks as a reminder. This was normal. This was law. Medieval justice did not ask whether a man was truly guilty. It asked whether God would reveal the truth. And God, according to the courts, spoke through pain. The ordeal system dominated early medieval law. A man accused of a crime might be forced to plunge his hand into boiling water, to retrieve a stone from the bottom. His wound would be bandaged, sealed, left for 3 days. If it healed cleanly, he was innocent. If it festered, he was guilty. God had spoken. Another method involved fire. An accused person would carry a red-hot iron bar for 9 paces. The same rules applied. Healing meant innocence. Infection meant guilt. And guilt meant death. There was no defense attorney, no appeal, no presumption of innocence. The medieval mind believed that God intervened directly in human affairs, that he would not allow an innocent man to suffer. That truth revealed itself through agony. It was a convenient belief for those in power, because the powerful rarely faced the ordeal. Lords and knights had other options. They could pay fines. They could demand trial by combat, sending a champion to fight in their place. The poor had no such privilege. For them, justice meant pain, and pain meant confession. Torture was not a last resort. It was standard procedure. The medieval legal system assumed that the body could not lie under sufficient pressure. That truth lived somewhere deep inside a man, and with enough suffering, it would emerge. The rack stretched limbs until joints dislocated. Thumbscrews crushed bones into powder. The strappado, a rope system that hoisted victims by their wrists, tied behind their backs, tore shoulders from sockets. Confessions poured out. True or false, it did not matter. Once a man confessed under torture, his fate was sealed. And most men confessed. The human body was not built to endure what medieval torturers invented. The mind broke before the bones did. And then came the execution. The public execution was not merely punishment. It was performance. It was theater. The state, whether lord or king or church, demonstrated its absolute power over life and death. The crowd was not an audience. They were participants. Their presence validated the killing. Their fear ensured their compliance. Hangings were common, quick by some standards. The condemned would climb a ladder, a rope placed around their neck, and the ladder would be pulled away. Death came slowly. Strangulation, but not a broken neck. The body would twitch and kick for minutes, sometimes longer, but hanging was merciful compared to what awaited traitors. In England, the punishment for high treason was hanging, drawing, and quartering. The condemned would be dragged through the streets behind a horse, hanged until nearly dead, cut down while still breathing. Then the executioner would slice open the abdomen, pull out the intestines, the heart, show them to the dying man before his eyes went dark. Yet only then would the body be hacked into 4 pieces, sent to 4 corners of the kingdom, displayed on spikes, a warning that echoed across the land. This was not madness. This was policy. The medieval state understood something fundamental about human nature. Fear works. A population that witnesses such horror does not rebel lightly. A serf who sees his neighbor disemboweled for stealing grain thinks twice before taking a single kernel. The brutality was the point. So, and the church was no gentler. Heresy, believing the wrong thing about God, carried penalties beyond imagination. The Inquisition refined torture into science. Detailed manuals described exactly how much pain to inflict, how long to wait between sessions, how to extract confessions without killing the accused too quickly, because death was not the goal. Confession was. The church needed heretics to recant, to admit their error publicly, to validate the church's absolute authority over truth itself. Only after confession came the flames. Burning at the stake was reserved for the worst offenders, heretics, witches, those who threatened the spiritual order. The condemned would be tied to a post, surrounded by kindling and straw. The fire would be lit at their feet. If they were lucky, the smoke would kill them first. If they were not, they would feel their skin blister and blacken. Their fat would render and drip. Their screams would fill the square until their lungs burned from the inside. The crowd watched. The crowd always watched. Children grew up seeing these spectacles. They played games afterward, mimicking executions. This was their world. Violence was not exceptional. It was ordinary. It was how society maintained order. But justice was never equal. A lord who killed a peasant might pay a fine. A peasant who harmed a lord would die screaming. And the law existed to protect property. And peasants were property. They belonged to the land. They belonged to whoever owned the land. Their lives had value only in their labor. When a serf committed a crime against his lord, the punishment reflected this hierarchy. Theft might cost a hand. Poaching, hunting the lord's deer, could cost both eyes. Running away could cost everything. Fugitive serfs were hunted like animals, returned to their masters, that branded on the face so all would know their shame. Some lords preferred harsher lessons. A serf who fled might find his family punished in his place, his wife whipped, his children sold to another estate. The message was clear. You do not belong to yourself. Even minor offenses carried brutal consequences. A woman accused of nagging her husband might be fitted with a scold's bridle, an iron cage locked around her head, with a metal plate forced into her mouth to pin down her tongue, while she would be paraded through town, mocked, spat upon. A man who cheated his customers might be placed in the stocks, his head and hands locked in wooden boards, for hours or days, unable to move, unable to defend himself as townspeople threw rotten food, or stones, or worse. Public humiliation was punishment, but it was also entertainment. The medieval world had no television, no books for common people, no distractions from the endless labor of survival. Executions and punishments offered spectacle. Crowds gathered eagerly. Vendors sold food and drink. Families made outings of watching men die. This was community. This was bonding. This was civilization. And beneath it all ran a current of absolute terror. Because anyone could be next. Accusations required little evidence. A neighbor's grudge could send a man to the torture chamber. A whispered rumor could condemn a woman as a witch. The courts did not seek truth. They sought confessions. And confessions were easy to obtain when the alternative was another turn of the rack. Innocence was no protection. The medieval justice system was not broken. It was working exactly as intended. It kept the peasants in the fields. It kept the serfs obedient. It kept the social order frozen in place for century after century. Fear held everything together. The baker in the pillory understood this now. His ears bled where the nails held them. His legs shook from exhaustion. Yet he had 2 more days to endure. 2 more days of mockery and pain, and the slow infection creeping into his wounds. He would survive. Probably. But he would never question authority again. He would never cut corners. He would never do anything that might bring him back to this platform. He would work. He would obey. He would die in obscurity. Exactly as the system intended. The medieval world did not believe in reform, did not believe in second chances, nor did not believe that criminals could change. It believed only in examples, in lessons written in blood and screaming flesh. Justice was meant to be witnessed, meant to be remembered, meant to be feared. And it was. For 500 years, this system held. Peasants were born into bondage, lived in bondage, died in bondage. They feared God. They feared their lords. They feared the law. And they feared what would happen if they stepped out of line. The pillory, the stocks, the rack, and the wheel, the stake. These were not relics of a barbaric past. They were tools of governance, instruments of policy, the foundation upon which medieval society was built. Pain was the law. Fear was the order. And justice, true justice, fair justice, merciful justice, did not exist. Not yet. Not for centuries to come. The sun set over the village square. The baker hung in his pillory, whimpering softly. The crowd dispersed, returning to their homes, their hovels, their endless labor. Tomorrow they would be back. There was always another lesson to witness, always another reminder, always another reason to be afraid.